Every business has a culture. Every business has a culture. The culture is made up of the thousands of interactions that your employees have on a daily basis. You can either build that intentionally or let it build itself. In a remote firm, you have to build it intentionally.
There's an entire generation of Americans who no longer care about prestige, titles, work travel, fancy offices, and lunches. Welcome to Mundane Millionaires, a podcast for this generation of small business owners who want to set their ego aside and focus on what matters: family, community, quality of life, and cash flows. In each episode, Eric Pacifici and Kevin Henderson uncover what it takes to get a little money in the bank, control your time, and invest in building great families and lives. Let's get started.
All right, Kev, we just had Brandon Hall of Hall CPA, real estate CPA on the pod. A really good episode, I think. Brandon is a really impressive entrepreneur, particularly from our perspective, being guys that are in service businesses. He's done what I believe is impossible, which is scaling a service business that relies on people, or I think may be impossible.
Do you really believe that? We're in trouble.
I do. I think I don't think it's impossible. I think it's a very difficult feat, right?
It is, yeah.
In accounting, in law, to scale a firm like he's done, and he's been at it for a decade, right? And so he started when he was 25, and had the audacity, I guess is one way to describe it, to leave a Big Four accounting firm very early on and go right into running his own shop, which very few people would have the courage or the know how to do that. And he addresses how he got there, and it's similar to our story. So I thought that was pretty interesting. What were your takeaways?
No, I thought it was a great story and a great example of entrepreneurship kind of taking a mind of its own. I mean, I really enjoyed hearing the goals he set for himself back when he was launching his CPA firm. And I mean, his 10-year goal, I think he said, was like $1 million, right? Like he's on track to 10x, right? Which is fun and exciting. And, it kind of boosts that confidence of like things, when you really dig in, when you really learn how to manage, when you really learn how to lead, how rapidly these things can take a life of their own when growing and scaling a business. And I thought just a ton of super helpful information, and not just for folks like us in professional services. I mean, entrepreneurship generally, we talk about the different phases of growth and kind of bursting through that technical expert into management, into executive, and the difficulties of rising through that and things like that. Just super, super valuable information from a really experienced operator and someone who scaled a business. I thought it was a great conversation.
Yeah, no, totally. And, if I'm a guy who's driving in my car right now and I'm working a job I don't like and I'm interested in entrepreneurship, or even if I'm an entrepreneur like at yours and I's level, we've started recently, things are going well, but we're building and we're trying to kind of figure it out as we go.
Yeah.
Fascinating to kind of unpack the story of what a business will do, and going through those various stages, like you said, of being that operator who's grinding. Brandon, I think, probably grinded as hard or harder than anybody who starts an entrepreneurship based on the way he described it, maybe even harder than he needed to necessarily, but accelerating his timeline and then transitioning into kind of the manager phase and then to the executive phase and having a dramatically different lifestyle. And then all of a sudden, okay, like I've got a great organization that I've built. So now I need to diversify out into real estate. And what's the best way to do that once you've got cash flow? So he tells the full kind of entrepreneurial journey. And I always talk about like the goal for an entrepreneur is not to go build Google, not to go build Uber. Like that's not going to happen. And if you try, you're probably 99% fail, but you can do what Brandon did. The average person can go, not to minimize what Brandon did, but this should be the goal of the average person. Build a high quality service business that you're passionate about, scale it, and then get that money out into other diversified investments. And you've made it in America.
We preach about that time and time again. It's about financial and time freedom that doesn't require $1 billion. And I think Brandon is just a great example of someone who certainly paid his dues. And he talks about those, like you said, those long work weeks early on when scaling, but he's really built something special. I think that's some phenomenal financial and kind of time freedom and wealth for him and his family. So we'll let the episode stand on its own. Enjoy our chat with Brandon Hall. All right, Brandon, super excited to have you join Mundane Millionaires today. Why don't we just start with kind of the preliminaries and get them out of the way quickly? Why don't you introduce yourself? I know you're an accountant, you run your own firm, but why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the firm you run, and then let's really dig into your entrepreneurial journey.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me. Really excited to be here. So I am the founder CEO of Hall CPA PLC. We're also known as like the real estate CPAs, the realestatecpa.com. The firm is 100% niched in real estate. So we've got about 800 clients across the United States. It's 100% remote, which is really cool. So we service all of our clients remotely, and all of our employees work out of their homes all across the United States and globe, I should say. We've got about 60, 65 folks globally. I started the firm back in 2015, and I've grown it, since. So the last 2 years, we've been on the Inc. 5000, which is really cool. We're starting to get some notoriety in the accounting space, which is really cool. But we just run a very different look and feel type of firm. We fix price 95% plus of our projects, or fixed / value price. We don't bill hourly. We don't track time, especially for performance reasons.
Just to be clear for the regulators listening, he means fixed fee pricing, not that he does price fixing. No, I'm just kidding. Bad joke,
yeah, exactly. No. So we, just a very different look and feel, very different firm.
Yeah.
More modern approach to it. But it's been a lot of fun. It's been great. I graduated back in 2013 from college, did a year and a half at Price Waterhouse, did another year and a half at Ernst & Young. And then launched this, and just thought that I could do it better. Honestly, when I launched this, it was a lot of ego. It was just a lot of me not wanting to take orders, thinking that I could do it better. And man, I made a lot of mistakes.
Yeah.
If you're launching a firm and you're unhappy with your current firm, just know that they're, especially like a big firm, they've been around for a while. They've gone through those mistakes. So you might disagree with the business model, but they figured a lot of things out. Something that I had to figure out.
We found ourselves saying that a lot when we were launching our law firm, where it was like, oh, we're gonna completely disrupt the legal industry, which I think we have to an extent. But as time went on, we found ourselves saying more and more like, okay, now I get why they do it that way, right? And why they've done it that way for 250 years.
Every consultant we talked to when we started was giving us exactly the same business model, and we were like, "That's where they now got to go up market." But so I mean, I guess you got to the heart of the first question, but it's fascinating to me. You graduated in 2013. The Inc. list has you starting the firm in 2016. You said 2015. We'll have to fact check that. But
I think in 2015 I netted like $4,000. So I don't know, depending on who's asking, depends on when I say.
Well, that was getting. Did you start in public accounting? Say, I'm going to go start my own firm. I just need a couple of years. And where did that come from? Because to me, as somebody, as a lawyer, right? Maybe that's an analog, maybe it's not. But I started in big law, and looking out and thinking about starting my own firm seemed virtually impossible, or like brain damage compared to being at a big place like UI, PwC. So tell us about that. How did you get started?
Yeah. So I've always had visions of entrepreneurship. When I was in high school, I had like a little mulching lawn mowing business. In college, tried to sell t-shirts and books and different things like that. And none of that was like very successful at all, but it didn't matter. I was like trying, and I thought it was cool to like make a little bit of money. And when I graduated college, I don't know necessarily that entrepreneurship was on my mind, but financial independence definitely was. So I had audited a real estate finance class my senior year of college. So I sat in on a master's class, and the professor had like 50 properties. And so he and I would go get coffee, and he'd tell me all about his portfolio. So I had like really early exposure to the power of investing in rental real estate, what that can do for you over the long run.
Yeah.
And I think that was really important. So for me, I was just more focused on financial independence. But what happened was, when I got to PwC, I was about 3 months into the job and realized this is just not going to work for me. Like I can't, it's terrible. I thought going into it, and this is what they sell you on when you're going to school, is like Big Four. That's the way to go. which I might get skewered by the accountants, but I kind of agree with. If you're coming out of school, you go for the biggest shop that will take you from a resume building perspective, and you're going to set yourself up for the future. And that was kind of my mindset. So I went the biggest shop that would take me, which is PwC. And I kind of learned that my financial independence was going to take a really long time, like to the tune of 15, 20 years, right? Make partner, make 400K a year, and then finally you've made it. So I was kind of doing the math, and it was about 3 months in, I got really disgruntled because I was just like, I don't want to wait that long. There's got to be something else. And so I started trying to figure out how to invest in real estate at that point. But through that process of trying to figure out how to invest in real estate, I learned that there were a lot of people asking tax questions about investing in real estate. I was studying for my CPA exam at the time. So I just figured it'd be a good test of my knowledge to see if I could answer these tax questions. And what happened was it was this loop, this addiction loop, because it was this online forum called Bigger Pockets.
Yep.
People would ask questions. I would reply with an answer. And then they would reply and they would say, "Thank you so much. You're great." Right. So I'm getting this positive feedback.
How do I hire
you? Yeah. Well, and it took a while for people to say, "Can I hire you?"
Yeah.
It was probably like a 6-month process before the first person sort of reached out. But I had gotten addicted to this, "Thanks so much. You're great." This positive feedback that I wasn't getting anywhere else. So I just did more and more of that. Like I got addicted to the process of giving people these answers online, which ironically built my brand on that platform, which then gave me the jumpstart to build the business. So once I realized I had a path to business, I realized, okay, cool. I can realize my financial independence goals a lot earlier. I can run a remote firm. I can have 50 clients. I can make, 90K a year, and I can sit on the beach or I could go anywhere that I want to. I don't have to, I don't have to be in an office. I don't have to wear a suit and tie. I don't have to see the clients face to face. All I have to do is just figure out how to have 50 of these clients. And that's kind of where it started. It's since blossomed massively since, but
how many clients do you have today, Brady?
We've got about 800 clients.
Yeah. Wow.
That's crazy.
Very impressive. Yeah.
Thank you.
How, thinking back to that time, I'm just curious how, had you seen other people doing the remote model and things like that? Because I feel like in 2023, it's one thing where coming out of the COVID pandemic and the whole world's realizing how much can actually be remote that doesn't have to be in person. I felt like back in 2015, 2016, when you're thinking about doing this, that was a pretty radical idea. How did you stumble on that and think this is really a workable, viable solution without having a good model to see oh, those guys are killing it. I'll just go model what they do.
Yeah. Well, so like I said, so there are two things. One, on this Bigger Pockets forum, I realized there were people all over the country that were asking these tax questions. And so I just figured, hey, as long as you're willing to jump on a phone with me and do emails, we don't need to see each other face to face. We'll be okay. And if I could convince people that was okay, that if they were working with somebody that was just doing real estate tax returns, that's better for them, then I figured I could win in the long run. But on the flip side, there was nobody else that I was aware of at the time that was doing this. So I just didn't want to, I hated having to go into an office every day and not see the client. I mean, we sit on the client side, but we don't actually see the client. So I just hated that whole process. I hated the commute. I figured I could buy back 2 hours of my time because I was in DC, right? So commutes were pretty gnarly. So it was just, I wanted to be able to work anywhere in the world and service my clients at the same time. I wanted to be able to travel and service my clients. I've since done zero traveling, but some people on my team have done some traveling, which is great. It wasn't like, I had this great idea of, if I run this virtual firm, I'll have lower overhead costs and, I'll be more profitable and all that stuff. It was really just, okay, there's people all over the world asking these questions, and I don't want to meet them face to face anyway, because I just don't like that whole process. Not that I don't like meeting people face to face. That's kind of where it stemmed from. I did later find out that there was an accountant his name's Ryan Lazanis, he was running a virtual firm. I think he started his in 2013, but I was not aware of him at the time. So yeah, to me, it was totally brand new, figured all the processes. There was really nobody to copy.
I kind of chuckled to myself when you said it took a while to kind of get to the point where people were like, "Can I hire you?" And then I think you said it was something like 6 months or something. I just wanted to pause and point out, because we ran into the same thing with a law firm, because when you're in the thick of it, that feels like an eternity. But if you really step back and look at the macro level, just for people out there listening, thinking like, how do I make this transition? How do I build the reputation? 6 months is not a long time to start putting out valuable content, to start building a reputation, to be able to get people to start hiring you. And I think that's just such a great, fascinating story. We found the same thing. We very publicly built our law firm off of Twitter. And it was literally a matter of months of putting out valuable content when Eric and I kind of reconnected and looked at each other and said, man, there are a lot of people, needing legal. It feels like it's a huge undertaking, but from a macro level, just stepping back, it goes quick when you invest the time into building that reputation. Success bears that out.
I mean, let's drill down on this, Kim, because I think that this is fascinating. Because what Brandon's describing is largely the experience that we had, which is you go from being somebody who's just providing value to people because you're passionate about the space, utilizing the skill set that you have. And I get this question all the time. I'm like, what can I go do that's similar to you guys and be an entrepreneur? And you got to look at that Venn diagram of what you're good at, what you're passionate about, what you can make money doing. And so you found something where, hey, I'm sitting on a Reddit forum answering questions because I love the subject matter and I'm able to address it as an expert from some, maybe a technical background like accounting or legal or whatever your skill set is. But that's where you should, and then you find out I can make money doing it. You should attack, because that's where entrepreneurship genius comes in. That's how you go from being a 25-year-old guy who launches a firm to being on the Inc. 5000 list a decade later, because you have to love it. I think you have to love it. When somebody loves the subject, you can tell in the organization that they build. So really fascinating things. I'm hearing you describe that, right? I'm going, shit, that's exactly what we did.
Yeah. Well,
just way sooner. So I'm a little bit jealous.
Yeah. Well, you definitely have to love it, because there's a lot of work. There's a lot of long hours, and there's a lot of pain that comes from running a business. So if you don't love it, you're going to burn out real quick. But, that was my experience of not knowing how to run a business and learning how to run a business. But, that's like, there's just a lot of growing pains that you have to work your way through that require a lot of hours and just brute force to make it through. Now on the back end, there's a lot of things that I would do differently, knowing what I know now. So I feel like I could go and launch businesses in places that I'm not passionate about or don't love. But that first one, if you don't love it, you're gonna burn out real quick.
So you think, not to put words in your mouth, you think part of your ability to kind of stick with it and find the success, particularly doing it at such a young, let's call it a spade, inexperienced age as an accountant, had a lot to do with the passion, in a way where someone who's been doing it for 20 years, maybe passion isn't as integral. Is that kind of what I'm hearing you saying?
100%. Yeah. I loved the idea of real estate. When I bought my first 3-unit property, right before I actually took on my first client. So I was always able to say I'm a CPA that has investment real estate, right? Which really helped me in the market. But I loved it. I loved the idea of real estate. I loved underwriting properties, modeling things out. It was just like the idea of financial independence and real estate giving you cash flow and sitting on the beach and doing nothing was amazing to me at the time. So it allowed me, that love for it allowed me to work through the inevitable pain of learning how to run your first business, especially like a business like ours, right? Where it's people heavy. It's not like I was, building a product that I could scale without a team. I had to learn how to lead people. A lot of times people that were older than me, and, certainly made my fair share of mistakes there. So.
Well, I'll buy in. You said work through the inevitable pain. How long? Describe that process. How long so you're starting your first business, you're passionate about it, so you can cut through the pain. What is that? What does an aspiring entrepreneur expect from that experience?
I think that so in my experience, and I think that it's true for most accounting firms, until you reach $1 million, it's a slog. It's a straight grind. And
revenue or earnings?
Revenue, $1 million revenue. because you can't, until you get to that point, you really can't start to build out your infrastructure. Like you can't afford it. You just need people who are going to prepare and review tax returns and people that are going to do bookkeeping and review the bookkeeping, which means that all the systems development, all the infrastructure development relies on you as the owner, which translates to 80-hour work weeks for 3 years. At least that was my experience. So I pulled roughly, I'll say roughly. I mean, sometimes it was more, sometimes it was less, but 80 hours was kind of the norm for probably about a period of 3 years. And I mean, if I was sick, I would still work. I skipped every holiday, Thanksgiving, Christmas, everything. People around me, my family, my wife, at the time my fiance, and then my wife, my family, my sisters, my parents, they would all comment every single time that we got together about how much I worked and how it's unhealthy, which it probably was. I mean, it's just there's nothing about what I just said that is healthy, and I let my health go. But I just figured that if I could get to certain points of scale, that I could build infrastructure out. I didn't know where that point was.
Yeah.
But for me, it was about $1 million where I could finally start hiring people that could help, like more administrative, office-based folks that could really help drive things forward in terms of systems implementation. And then it probably took us to about $4 million of revenue to where I finally was able to pick my head up and say, we've got something now that's rock solid, and I can step away from the majority of the operations. So there's just different phases, I think, when you're running a people-focused firm. Like I tell accountants, and I don't know if this is true in your profession, but I tell accountants the hardest time to run an accounting firm is probably between 10 to 20 employees. Because your first 10 employees or so are like scrappy. They're really good at putting out fires. They work out of their email. That's their task management system, right? Whatever client's yelling at you the loudest, that's the one you do next. And 0 to 10 employees, that type of system, it works. It's not that bad. But when you hire employee number 11, they expect you to run a legit business, right? Like you just, there's this transition somewhere in there where it's just like the next employee is like, well, do you have an HR team? So no, I'm HR.
Yeah.
But
Who do I reach out about?
exactly. Yeah. And so you start onboarding those people who are game changers for your organization, but now all of a sudden you've got to give them a lot more than what you gave your first cohort of folks. And that means that now, on top of the sales and the marketing and the client service that you're doing and the professional development and the employee management that you're doing, you also have to build stronger systems for this next round of people. So for me, 10 to 20 employees was incredibly challenging. Once we got past 20 employees, it became a lot easier.
Yeah.
Put that in context of the revenue numbers you just gave us. Because to me, so you said step away from the majority of the operations at 4 million. Is that, did that mean you became passive, or what did that mean? Because to me, getting from 1 million in revenue, you get to 1 million in revenue, you're like, okay, I figured it to an extent.
I'm on to
Now
something.
I just have to, now I just have to go do that same thing more times and I'll get to 4 million, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't feel like that big of a jump to, having, built a similar service business. So what does your life look like at sub $1 million versus north of 4 million in terms of your day to day?
Sub $1 million was kind of grind mode day in, day out. It was putting out fires constantly, never being able to get ahead of client service, mispricing things, just not having great systems across the board. So when you don't price your services effectively, you can't pay better people more money to come join you, which means that you have to personally make up for that difference. So I was doing just a lot of the work. And again, this is just a lot of the learning process that you go through trying to figure out how to scale something like this. So if I did it all over again, I would do it completely differently. But at the time, that's what I did. So once I got past 1 million and I started onboarding that 10 to 20 employee range, things were getting easier because now I was onboarding managers that could manage the workflow and manage the fires. And it allowed me a little bit more time to go and focus on building the systems. But as I scaled, once I hit about 4 or so million, I was able to onboard people that could take over the system development too. So like a lot of the fires were off of my plate. The one-on-one delivery became less and less. The systems development became less and less. So your role you start to move out of the day-to-day and more into the like, okay, what are we doing next? how do I coach my employees to bring out the best in them? And that's kind of where the role shifts to. And I would say, last year we did 6.1 million, and I was able to fully afford a VP of operations for the entire year. And that was just a complete game changer. I mean, I was still like involved in some things last year, but now that he's got a year under his belt starting this year, 2023, I was out of a lot. I mean, like almost zero day-to-day operational type stuff, because he runs all of that, which allows me to focus on content, marketing, employee coaching and development, and building even stronger systems and developing even better people.
So I was going to ask, at the time of this recording in September 2023 or whatever, what your role looks like today. So you're largely managing people and running a sales funnel, essentially, is what I hear you saying.
Yeah. I mean, my goal right now is to enhance our marketing so that we can bring in great clients.
Yeah.
It's to focus on recruiting. So we, need to effectively be like where you would normally outsource your recruiting to some other shop. We need to now build that in-house. We need to hire 30 people next year to keep up with our growth. So how do you go? And I mean, we're at 60 right now. How do you hire 30 more people in 12 months? Yeah. Well, we got to be posting on LinkedIn and Twitter and making connections in the industry and making all of the accountants aware that we exist and that we're doing things a little uniquely and differently in order to facilitate that. So it's building the sales pipeline, but it's also building a recruiting pipeline. And then it's a lot of the coaching of my leaders so that they can go and coach their teams.
Yeah. And are you looking back to when you launched, would you say you're sitting today where you thought you would be back then? Were you thinking you were going to build this into a behemoth, or this was going to be a small lifestyle business, or what? Like, how does this stack up with what your goals were when you were first starting?
That's a great question. When I first started, I framed my goals. And I think the only one that I didn't hit was like write a book or something, which I just don't want to dedicate myself to doing right now.
It sounds like based on our conversation with Nick Huber, it's a terrible business anyway. So
really, that's good. Yeah. I mean, we have like little books for lead magnets and advertising flows and stuff. But I think that if I can recall correctly, my 5-year goal was to like gross 500K, and my 10-year goal was to gross $1 million. I had no idea that you could build a business to be more than this or more than that. And I had zero idea that I would be here today, saying that, we're probably going to do 8.2 million this year in revenue. Like,
with those numbers, it sounds like you really thought this was going to be you acting as an accountant, maybe with some support staff for a number of clients effectively.
Yeah. I mean, I had like modeled out, all right, I'll buy an Audi R8 in 20 years when I'm 45. And I was happy with all that. That was fine. But you know what happened? I started doing tax returns for real estate investors. And as my brand grew, more sophisticated and more successful real estate investors came to me. Yeah. And when you do those tax returns, you just start realizing that these people are making an incredible amount of money, right? So I thought, I came out of college. I had an offer. I accepted my offer with PwC for $65,000. I was in their consulting department. That was my out of college offer. I thought I was rich. Like, I mean, I thought that was just more money than I would ever need in my life.
That already come much sooner.
Yeah. And so, I had I just thought that I had it made. And then, doing this business and seeing people making, doing doctor tax returns, they're making 600K a year. You kind of get anchored to this new number, right? So it's like, okay, what I'm making isn't good, but that's good. So how do I make 600K? And then you start doing this stuff for like these guys that run these funds and these syndicates, and they're making 2 million a year. And you're like, I didn't even realize that was possible to make that much money, but how do I go and figure out how to do that? So
it never ends. That will never end, Brandon, for ambitious people. I've had this conversation a million times with, mentors and people in the law, and, you're making 2 million. How does that feel? You're making 5 million. How does it feel? You're always chasing the next hurdle. And I tried convincing my mentor in big law that I told him, if I ever get to 10 million in net worth, I'm out. Done. I'm chilling. And he was like, he's laughing.
Yeah.
So, no, you won't.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
you know what?
On
that note, though, I just want to make a quick comment on that note, because I think that you are absolutely right But I think that for some, maybe most, I'm not really sure. For some people, when you hit a certain earnings threshold, you spin around and you go, what now what? And for me, that earnings threshold was way lower than I anticipated. Like I said, like I thought 65K was rich. So you can imagine that this earnings threshold was for me was not that high. And when I hit that, I got like semi-depressed for a period of maybe 6 months after that because I didn't know what the purpose of running the business was anymore. I was still putting out a lot of fires and everything, but I was like, I already hit this earnings thing that was going to make me happy. And so for me, I had to really kind of reflect on what do I want to get out of the business? What do I really want to do? And so, yes, I want to make money, but before that inflection point, it was all about making money. And after that inflection point, it's become a much larger and more inclusive vision than just let's go make a ton of money. Money's important, but it's not the end all be all anymore.
Well, the pressures and the goals and and things like that change when you're no longer chasing that paycheck, right? And you see that a lot in entrepreneurship, particularly in the ETA space where Eric and I spend a lot of our time, and folks talking about be careful of whether you're buying a paycheck or buying an asset that can scale and become worth real value. And I think when you get to that threshold, it changes a lot of your internal conversations, your goals for your family. When all of a sudden the paycheck side is handled, now I have this different source of wealth to really start thinking about what legacy do I want? How do I want to continue to build? What are the goals for my family? And that's where it becomes really exciting.
Let's back up though, Kevin, and actually put some names on this, because I think what Brandon has described is fascinating to me. And I think it's a great model for any aspiring entrepreneur to say, what do I want to have happen? Brandon's got the 10 years of look back now to say, here's what happened and here's what I would otherwise do. And here are some important thresholds. And I think it's fascinating because you described, and I would summarize it by saying you went from being somebody who discovered a passion that you could build a service business around that allowed you to push through that initial, we'll call it the operator phase, where you're in the slog. It's you at your kitchen table, you're grinding, you're operating a business, you're answering questions, you're the whole dog and pony show. And at that stage, and this is something Kevin and I talked about when we launched our firm, you don't know when you're in the operator stage, is there a market for me to build something more than just me at my kitchen table, doing a couple of transactions, having a couple of clients? And if there isn't, that's actually probably okay. I can make a decent living. I'm working a job, but I've got control over that job. But if there is a market that is open to me building something more significant, it's going to take a really big push in that sub-$1 million operator stage. Then you flip, you hit the $1 million revenue mark. And, for different businesses with different margins, this will probably be different, but you get into the manager stage. Now I am still a subscale business, but I have some resources so I can start managing people and bringing in decent people to help build out some infrastructure in the business. That phase, at least in my experience and mine and Kevin's experience, because I think that's largely, Kevin, where we're at right now in our business. You're no longer in the operator phase, but it's similarly challenging because now your role has switched and you're trying to build an actual business. And for us as lawyers and for you as an accountant, I would suspect you are in a similar position where you've never built a business before. You've never managed that many people before. So you're having to learn that skill set on the fly as you're flying the airplane. Then you get north of that 4 million, you figure it out. Now you have a model that works. You got the infrastructure in place. You got people who are putting out fires instead of you. You get up to that $4 million mark, at least in your business. And that you then switch to that executive role. I think at that point, you're more of a CEO than you are a manager. You're actually running a viable operation. And you're saying, okay, I've got a model that works. And now I can hopefully scale this to $8.1 million in the next couple of years or whatever it is. So kind of a fascinating thing. My question to you would be, which stage is the most challenging of those three? And which, I would suspect that most businesses probably peter out or die in the manager stage. And most people don't even have the ability to do what you've done and get to the executive stage. So what's your perspective on it, kind of characterizing it like that?
I would agree with you in terms of where most businesses really hit their ceiling and they're not able to advance is probably that manager stage as you described it. Because I think that you have to shift when you get out of that, like that operator phase and you're moving into that manager phase. It requires a different skill set, just like it does when you're moving from manager to executive. It requires a different skill set. And so you have to consciously make a shift, learn new skills, and continuously develop yourself in order to keep pace with the business growth. And I think a lot of people aren't willing to do that. At least that's been my experience, like talking to folks in the accounting space. Not necessarily that they're not willing to do that. They don't know how to get out of the I'm a technical expert and I'm doing the work type of role. And there's a lot of fear with moving out of that role. And I've experienced this in my own firm, trying to get my own top people out of the technical work and more focused on that manager, that executive level role. There's a lot of fear in letting that go, because for all my life, I've been an accountant where the value is based on how many returns do I prepare and how well do I do it. And now you're asking me to do this thing that's totally foreign. And I don't know if I'm going to succeed. I don't know if I can learn these new skills, which you totally can. But that's the fear, right? And so it's almost like, well, I'd rather just keep preparing the tax returns and not do this next thing, because I know what my value is when I do the tax returns, right? I know what my value is when I do the accounting. But what you miss is you miss leverage. It's just a misunderstanding of what leverage is, right? When I am preparing tax returns, when I am working on the accounting, doing whatever, the client service, that's valuable, but only to an extent. My only leverage is my hourly rate if you bill hourly. If I advance to the manager level, now I've got more leverage because now I'm leading a team that's servicing the client. And if I advance to the executive level, I've got even more leverage because I have more resources to deploy, either people or systems or money, however I see fit. So it's all about just understanding leverage. But to answer your question, the hardest part for me was just that operator phase. It was just it was a grind, man. I actually really enjoy the manager and the executive level, like the leadership type stuff. It's one of the areas that I excel. So it was an easy transition for me, but I have seen many people struggle, even in my own firm, successfully make that transition.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to make a joke that, like, I almost feel half judged hearing you talk this through, right? Because that's at least personally, and Eric, I'm sure has a different experience he can speak to here in a second. But I find myself hitting that wall of where you're talking about that transition out of technical expert and really being in the weeds in a deal, doing substantive legal work, and being able to take that step up to the managerial level and start relying on a broader team for that technical expertise. And it's a tough transition when you've built a career on that technical expertise and really aligned your professional value on that level of technical expertise, to then decouple that and take a step back and say, well, maybe my value is actually better added in a managerial or executive capacity. And there are a lot of other great technical experts out there. And that's a tough transition I find myself in right now.
Yeah, it's scary,
It is.
because you're giving up a piece of, what got you to this point. Right. And now you're being asked to do this completely new thing and learn completely new skills. And that can be terrifying, especially if somebody is concerned about job security. And that's what I've learned in my own firm. It's very hard to get people to transition the way that you need them to transition into these new roles, because they don't want to give up what got them to that point. But what I try to tell accountants in my own firm, and also, whenever I talk to other firm owners, is if you can build a business where you get to choose what you work on a day in, day out basis, then you can still choose to go prepare tax returns if that's what, makes you happy. Yeah. But the difference is that I'm volunteering to help my team get work across the finish line instead of being forced to do that because I haven't built my platform effectively. And right. That's the difference that I like to drive home.
You're still, to use our prior example, you're still relying on the paycheck generation in a way that you're not to the same extent once you're over in that managerial or executive role.
Yep.
That's interesting. I'd be interested in pivoting for a second just to talk a little bit more about real estate as well. I mean, it sounds like from a very early age, while in college, you really got interested in real estate. What made you, beyond passion, go all in on that vertical? I mean, have you toyed with the idea of diversifying, or what is it that just has you all in on real estate at this point?
Yeah. So in college, I started learning about financial independence. I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I read all the books on how to manage your money. And I kept coming back to real estate as a way to build passive income. And that's what it initially got me really interested in it. I bought my first property early 2015. It was a 3-unit property, and it cash flowed $700 a month. And I think at the time I was earning like, I don't know, 80K or something. So $700 a month was amazing. But then I sat down and I started building out my financial model, which I always did at the time. And I realized, okay, it's going to take me 15 years to replace my income. And I was like scaling my income up over this time because I figured I would continue to get raises. Sure. And that's when I realized, all right, real estate's awesome, but unless you make it a business, it's going to take too long for me to get the financial independence that I'm looking for. Yeah, I love real estate. The cash flow, the debt pay down, the appreciation just gives you a great total return. And then you also have tax benefits, which we specialize in, that help you shield all of that. So,
do you mind sharing? So what does your real estate portfolio look like today? What are you in? Are you single family home rentals? Are you all in on commercial? What does your personal portfolio look like at this point?
Small multifamily properties. So duplexes, tris, quads. I've got 25 units total. And we haven't bought anything. I say we, my wife and I guess, haven't bought anything probably in the last 18 months or so. I think just the current market and the interest rates is incredibly high. So we're hoping that over the next 12, 24 months, we'll be able to continue expanding the portfolio. But that's what I currently have today. But it's been interesting. It's like my original view on real estate was this is my ticket out of work. And now my view on real estate is this is a way to preserve and grow wealth. I'm looking at my CPA firm as the main breadwinner and then just moving that cash into this asset class.
Takes a long time to make money in real estate.
It does. If you do it the way I'm doing it, it takes you an incredible amount of time. Yes. But we have some clients, man, that if you make it a business, just like anybody else, if I dedicated 60 hours a week to run a real estate business, you can make great money in real estate.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think people think of real estate, though, as a passive asset class. And I think that's the important point to hone in on is the real kind of income generation and rapid wealth building of real estate isn't from the passive nature. It's from actively running it like a business. Yeah. And that those who are trying to do it more passively, it's a little bit of a not tougher, but longer lead time. But that's an outside observer who, someone interested in real estate but hasn't made the jump yet.
Yeah, I think that the passive marketing word or story is for sure false.
Our clients buy passive small businesses all the time, Brandon. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
passive. Yeah, sure.
That's the question we get.
I bought one of my 25 units is a short-term rental, and it's a beach rental. And, it requires maybe like an hour or so a week to run it, but it's like hours at random times, 10:30 at night. It's so obnoxious. There's no, real estate's not passive. I'm sure that you can make passive investments, as a limited partner in syndications and funds. But if you're buying the underlying asset, it's not going to be passive for you. It's not going to be an incredible amount of time, but it's not going to be passive. So what I have seen servicing clients is that there is this in between of like my real estate investing to date has been buy the asset, hand it off to a property manager, hope for the best. And that's not how you maximize your return, right? But again, I'm spending all my time on my CPA firm. But there are people that are in between that and like running the real estate business full time who will dedicate 10 hours a week to building their portfolio and making sure that it's running effectively and making sure the property manager's top notch. And definitely less passive, but they make a lot more money. We have clients that do that. And especially over the past 7 years, like if you've been buying property, doing some rehab work to force the appreciation on it, even if we're talking like single family homes, doing a cash out refinance, buying the next property, just recycling those funds. We've seen people build pretty significant portfolios over the past 7-8 years just because of where the market was, and the market just
Right.
running up and pushing all the values way up. So some people
But
built
even
some pretty
now,
significant equity.
let's expand on the model that we talked about before. You start the service business, you're passionate, you go from operator to manager to executive. Now you've built something of significance. Your strategy with real estate is to keep keep tax advantages. Talk about the overall strategy of what you're trying to do. And we had somebody similar on recently who was in the consulting space, makes a lot of money consulting, goes and buys residential real estate in great neighborhoods with great schools. And that's so this is a trend. So talk to us about the tax advantages of this and why somebody would want to do what you've done.
Yeah. So I think when you start earning, I mean, regardless of how much money you're earning, the question is always, what do I do with the savings, right? Do I leave it in a bank account? Do I put it into equities? Do I put it into real estate? And for me, personally experiencing it, granted, I haven't been through a big economic recession. I graduated 2013, right? So I missed 08, 09. And I'm very well aware of that. So what I'm saying is green, take my words with a grain of salt. But for me, investing in real estate is the best deal because I get cash flow. As you know, I only invest in properties that cash flow. So I get cash flow. The tenant's paying down the loan and the market's forcing the appreciation up a few percentage points a year, or over the past 6 to 7 years, a lot more than that.
Yeah.
So I'm building a lot of equity, right? But it's all tax advantaged. Like the cash flow that I'm receiving is sheltered by depreciation most of the time. The equity that I'm building is not taxed until I sell the asset, and I don't have to sell the asset. I could do a cash out refinance, which is just getting a new loan to pay off the old loan, and whatever the spread is between the value of the new loan and the old loan, I get to pocket. And then I get to go and buy more real estate with. Or I can do a 1031 exchange if I do want to sell the asset. I can sell the asset, move it into a new asset via 1031 exchange and not pay tax. When you think about that the power of the tax advantages coupled with the different ways that you make money in real estate, again, cash flow, appreciation, loan pay down, over the span of 30 years, it's hard to justify investing elsewhere. Now, I'm at a point where I'm starting to diversify a lot more, but even then it's still, every dollar that I put into equities, I'm like, should I be putting this into real estate instead?
Yeah.
And, I think that we're lucky enough at our firm where we have onboarded some pretty successful clients that are kind of at the end of their real estate journey. So you get to kind of see what the end result of your today's actions will be 30 years from now. And when you see that, you gain a lot more confidence in what you're doing today because you stick with real estate for 30 years. It's very difficult to blow it up. I mean, you can certainly do it. People have, right? You can over leverage, you can take risks that you should just not be taking. But as long as you approach it more conservatively, it's kind of hard to screw up. So that's overall why I really love real estate.
What's your doomsday prediction here? Just to go down that rabbit hole for a second. So we've got all these folks. I think somebody recently called the cash out refinance in real estate investing the holy grail of real estate investing, which to me felt a little weird at the time. I remember this distinctly. This was 2 years ago when things were still fantastic, and I remember thinking, well, what happens if you've got an entire portfolio of highly leveraged properties that you've taken all that cash out? And now you've got what happens when interest rates rise and you can no longer refinance those properties?
Well,
Or rent
yeah. So I think that for people that were buying pre 2021, and again, I'm just a CPA. I'm not an economist. I'm not a financial advisor. So take whatever I'm about to say with a grain of salt. You guys probably do those disclosures better than I do. But I think anybody that bought prior to 2021 is okay. Even if you leveraged up with cash out refinances, because, cash out refinance, they're not going to go more than a 70% loan to value, right? So you've got equity. But I also think what you've got playing in your favor is the fact that we are at, not so much anymore, but the lowest amount of supply that the real estate market has really ever seen. So everybody's very concerned about this big market crash. What happens when interest rates go skyrocketing like they have? And we've seen what happens. Well, demand falls off a cliff, but it doesn't mean that anything happens to supply, right? Like if rates go up to 7%, it's not going to necessarily make me say, let me go sell my home. It's not going to make builders bring more units onto the market. So we have these all-time low supply levels. And even though demand has cratered, we're still not at equilibrium. And until you get to that equilibrium point, until supply exceeds demand, you won't have price decreases. And so I think the going consensus among various real estate analysts that I follow is just that we're a long way off from that, like a long way off from that. So if you're worried about price decreases, I don't know that it's going to happen. Now, I do think in the multifamily space, you've got something interesting going on. So these people that were buying large multifamily assets and they were getting, well, I'll talk about the debt situation in a minute, but they were buying large multifamily assets and they'd raise a few $1 million from their investors.
Right.
I think that over the next 12 to 18 months, you're going to see, I don't want to say a collapse because I don't know how to make that prediction accurately or confidently, but I do think that you will see some sponsors lose their assets. So what was happening was sponsors were buying property with bridge debt. This is variable rate debt. So it's not like government backed debt, because the government backed debt, they would take the current P&L and they would underwrite based on the current P&L. So if I'm trying to buy a $20 million apartment complex and I go and I give the current P&L to these various lenders, the government backed is going, okay, well, based on the current P&L, we can give you 10 mil, which means that I've got to go and raise $10 million of equity to buy the $20 million apartment complex. The bridge debt, those lenders were looking at the pro forma. So I could write up what I thought I could make on the property after rehab, and the bridge debt would lend on that. So when I go to the bridge lender, they're looking at the pro forma and they go, I'll give you $15 million. Now I only got to raise $5 million in equity. I become a lot more competitive when acquiring assets. Right. At the same time, you had cap rate compression. So everything got more expensive. So all these things are working against operators. They're buying these properties, and then but the bridge debt is a 1, 2, 3 year debt, right? You've got to.
Okay, I was about to ask. So we're sitting in a period where there's probably a massive amount of multifamily out there with bridge debt in place that's coming due in the next 12 to 18 months.
Yes. And so it's coming due. And now that rates have spiked so much, the rate caps that these people buy, so you have to buy a rate cap that caps your rate in the event that rates rise. Well, back when they were buying in early 2021, it was $90K. Today, it's $1 million. So I've got to come up with $1 million to buy this rate cap, or I've got to somehow refinance my loan, and nobody's going to do that because I haven't even been able to add the value to meet the pro forma that I was originally lending on. So I think that you're going to see a lot of sponsors that were buying that way. They're going to struggle. And you've already kind of seen it. There's been some, if you follow real estate Twitter at all, there's been some prominent sponsors already go down. But I think over the next 12 to 18 months, you'll see more news on this, because that's when all these rate caps, or that's when all these bridge debt loans are expiring.
Yeah.
So
is bridge debt in that space? I mean, are like institutional lenders, or is this like private debt that's, I mean, who are these lenders doing the bridge loans?
It's a good question. Honestly, it's probably above my pay grade. I'll make myself look like a fool if I answer this confidently. I think that it's both. There's a lot of like funds that are involved in the lending process. So yeah.
Brandon, I think we've got time enough for, I think, one additional topic. And I loved the description of the business model and kind of how you built and then diversified to real estate. Talk to us about remote work. Obviously you were doing remote work before anybody else was doing remote work. That became a buzzword. Now people are headed back to the office. There's a lot of very smart people that may be biased, may not be biased, that are saying it doesn't work. We believe it does in our firm, but there's obviously pros and cons. Would love to hear your perspective, since you've been doing it now for the better part of, I guess, a decade.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that every company works differently, and if you want to have all your employees in an office, by all means, go for it. I used to be like a really hardcore remote work only, and I've kind of changed my tune on that. I think remote work is amazing for people that are accountable to themselves. You really have to find that type of person to work in your firm. Otherwise, you're going to struggle. Like a lot of new hires coming out of college what we have learned is that they have to first learn how to work a job before they're going to really thrive in our firm. So we tend to not hire a lot straight out of college. So I think that there's just different environments that serve it, that work well for different camps. Now, I will say that the people that say remote work doesn't work are typically missing something in the leadership department. Either they don't have good systems in place and they're not seeing that. They don't communicate clearly, they don't set clear expectations. They're not spending the time the way that they should with their staff. Like when you work remote and you have a remote team, you have to figure out how to build systems that keep everybody connected, not only on work, but also just for social reasons. And everything becomes more intentional. Like you want to talk about culture building, every business has a culture. Every business has a culture. The culture is made up of the thousands of interactions that your employees have on a daily basis. You can either build that intentionally or let it build itself. In a remote firm, you have to build it intentionally. You have to find ways to bring people together. In the office, people just chat, right? They just meet each other at the coffee station. They hang out at each other's cubicles. And so it's just less of a focus and can actually lead you down bad paths. So I think remote work just forces you to be a better leader and in more, I don't know, just thinking more about how to really build a cohesive company. Not to say that you can't get that in the office. I just think that the office can be a crutch in that regard and make you not even think about it until it's too late, until you realize, wow, I've got a really toxic culture here, or man, I really blew this up and for years and didn't realize it.
Have you dealt with or hired many kind of early career professionals, and how have you navigated that with the remote work model? Because that's something I struggle with. We've generally only onboarded pretty experienced folks who can operate on their own. But I mean, that's obviously one of the common arguments against remote work, right? Is how do you train up the next generation, right? When you aren't there to give immediate feedback and talk organically and things like that. I'm curious how you've navigated that.
Yeah. So all true, right? The common fears with remote work, if you've been working in an office, is I can't train them as effectively. The feedback loops are not going to be very good. Right. You know, they're not going to raise problems. I'm not going to have good communication. But the reality is that all of those things can be solved intentionally. If you're intentionally building systems to solve them. So for us, we have a way that we engage staff on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis that brings all of this out. We have a method of training that allows them to kind of get that feel of I'm looking over your shoulder and guiding you through the process. Our onboarding is very extensive. It's very thought through because we can't just wing it, right? You can't just show up to the office and say, all right, sit in that cubicle, pull up a tax return, let's start going. It doesn't work like that here. You got to be much more intentional about it. So we've solved all that, and we've just done it by implementing systems intentionally as those problems crop up to avoid them cropping up in the future. Now, the early career professionals, what I was saying, like folks coming right out of college, we haven't quite solved yet. So if you're coming right out of college, the main problem is, what does a job mean? How do you build good work habits? That's very difficult. What we have found, it's very difficult to train if this is your first job. So we actually love when people go to like the Big Four for 2 years, and then we can hire them because the Big Four will teach you those habits, and we can then hire and show you a whole beautiful new world that you can live and work in. But that coming out of college person, that's very difficult. We've had success where somebody's been an intern with us for multiple years and then graduated, and then they just join our firm straight up. But they've had multiple years of kind of easing into what does a real job look like. So we've had success there.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a double-edged sword, right? Because like I'd be lying if I said my experience, in big law firms didn't make me the M&A and securities lawyer that I am today. But by the same token, there's a lot of bad habits and things to unlearn as well. So, you kind of have to out with the bad and keep the good. But there's certainly a lot of benefit I see in doing that. It's tough. That's a tough problem to solve, I think, in a remote work environment.
Yeah, it is a tough problem to solve. And going back to the whole, like the phases of your business, right? When you're in operator mode, you don't have time to solve that problem.
Yeah, you can't.
Right. And so
I don't even have time to respond to Slack messages, let alone we're working
right.
on that over here, Brandon. So, but listen, amazing interview, Brandon. Really appreciate you taking the time to come on. We'll give you the last word, man. If there's anything you want to plug, your business, anything you're working on, let us know what it is and where folks can find you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. If you are interested in connecting, you can just hit me up on Twitter. I'm at Hall CPA. And then if you're like a real estate investor listening to this, or if you're a business owner or a high income earner listening to this, and you're like, man, I want to buy some real estate and hire you guys to do the taxes, hit us up at www.therealestatecpa.com.
Love that.
Amazing.
Brandon,
All right,
great
Brandon.
chatting with you today.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Mundane Millionaires. If you enjoyed what you heard in this episode, make sure to follow Mundane Millionaires wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. See you next time.